So in today's video, I'm going to go through lots of different types of hand embroidery frames, how to put your fabric in them, and then some hints and tips on how to use them. Welcome to my channel, Sarah Homfray Embroidery. I am Sarah and you are in the right place for everything hand embroidery. And before we get going, I've just got a couple of thanks that I want to say. So to Michelle, Rosa, Ruth, Robert and Linda, who have all donated via our super thanks button. You can see that below the video. It's a little heart with a symbol in it, and they've picked a video that they like and they've shown their appreciation by donating to us. So thank you for all of you for doing that. It's really appreciated. Everything that we receive will go back into equipment and materials for the videos that we make, so that we can continue to improve on those. So let's dive into the world of hand embroidery frames, and I've got loads to show you here. This isn't an exhaustive list, this isn't everything, but most of the things that you will find that I haven't got here are a variation on a theme. So I'm going to go through the different types, I'm going to show you how to frame them up, and then do stick around because I've got some hints and tips to help you when you use any kind of these frames. Okay, so firstly, do you need a hoop? So some people will love using hoops, some people will always work in their hand. So there are fors and against for both, and there are some occasions when some techniques require you to use them and when it's best if you don't use them. I've got a whole video on this subject, so I'm not going to go into it here, but you can check that out up here. That will be up until the end of the video. If you hover over there, that will come up. So do check that out and see what occasions you may or may not want to use a hoop and the advantages and disadvantages of both. So we're going to start with probably the most common one, and that is the round wooden embroidery hoop. You can get these all over the world. They come in loads of different sizes. They're relatively inexpensive and a great way to start your embroidery hobby or job or career, or however you want to go with your embroidery. They do vary a little bit though in type, so I'll just show you what they actually do. So there's just two hoops. They come apart. The middle one goes inside. The outer one, it's usually got a screw thread on it. Tighten it up with the screw thread and that traps your embroidery. Now the important thing with a wooden hoop is to look for the quality of this bit up here. So they do vary a little bit. So you can see these ones are bending in just a little bit here, and that makes it harder to tighten your hoop. So have a little look at the end and see what else you can find. I've got another one here with the same fitting, slightly different profile here. And they're good for a while, but then they will start to bend the more you use them. This one here is a really good quality one. You can see the difference if I just put those two together. You can see how, leave that there. You can see how strong this clasp fitting is here. That's not going to bend at all. This is going to last you a lifetime. So it might be worth just investing that little bit more in them and getting a really good quality hoop, and that will last you forever. So you also get these round hoops with extra fittings on them. Look like that. They've got that little stem on them, and that stem allows you to clamp it in a device, and that will hold it steady while you stitch on it. You've got both hands free. So that will go in quite a few different kinds of fittings. It'll go in a seat fitting, like so, and you can put that under your legs and sort of have that over your lap. We've also got a floor one. If you want to work that sitting at a chair, and you can have that on the floor and that in front of you, that works in the same way. And then the one obviously that I use all the time in my videos that lots of people ask me about is the versatile table clamp. So that goes in the barrel and the barrel fixes to the table. And that allows you to have both hands free. If you're interested in these, we do have these in the shop and we do have a video on it as well. So I'll put a link in the description below the video for that if you want one of those. These are fixed on here. You can't take that off. It's got a riveted on fastening. So these ones are specifically for that. The hoops are also quite a bit bigger as well. So that holds your fabric quite nice and strongly. So I want to mention this hoop first, this enormous hoop here. This is a quilting hoop meant specifically for quilters to stitch on their quilting with, which is why it's this size. So I don't recommend one this size for your hand embroidery. If you have an embroidery this big, we'll talk about other frames that'd be more suitable later. But just in case you see these, I wanted to mention what that was. I want to mention as well these. I've got a couple here. And you might notice these look a little bit different. So these ones have actually been bound. So these hoops, do have a little gap between the two separate hoops, and no matter how tightly you screw this fitting together to clamp your fabric, they can still move. It can be a bit shiny, and that gap can mean your fabric's a bit loose. So one thing that you can do with it is to bind your hoop like so. So this one I've just bound the inside one, and I've just put some bias binding around that one. We do have a video on that, so do check that out if you want to have a go at that. And that stops your fabric slipping so easily. It really does grip your fabric well. And if you find it still slipping a little bit with one, you can bind both of them like I have here on this one. So I've bound the inner one and the outer one, and that's super grippy. If you're using a really thick fabric though, it may not go in with two hoops bound, so just try one first, see how you get on, and then you can always do the second one if you want to. I want to mention one more of the wooden hoops because I found this one recently. I thought, oh, isn't that pretty? That's really lovely. It's got this really pretty pattern on it. I wouldn't use this for sewing in. You don't know what they've painted it with. If you were using a white fabric, it could come off on the white fabric, whatever the paint is. So I suggest just using that to frame your embroideries when you're finished, because they are super pretty, but I wouldn't be too confident about that not coming off on my fabric. So still on the theme of round hoops, we've got a plastic one here. So these are cheap and cheerful. You can get them in lots of different sizes as well. They've got the same screw fitting as the wooden ones have. So you can just unscrew that like so. Two hoops come apart, and it's got a slightly different contour on the inside of this one. So the wooden ones are smooth, but this one has just got a little moulding there that comes out, and then that fits into this channel here around the inside one, and that just gives the fabric a little bit of extra grip. So even though it's plastic and it's shiny, you've got that little bit of extra grip in there to hold your fabric tight. So that one works exactly the same way as the wooden ones do. I wanted to show you these frames specifically because these are really pretty. So these are flexi frames. And you'll notice that the fitting is different on these ones, and they've got this sort of wood grain type effect on them, but this little hanging hook at the top. Now these ones are really meant for just displaying your embroideries. Got one here, so my little creative goldwork rose there, and they're super great for displaying, really quick, really effective to do that, but I suggest you don't stitch in them. I suggest you stitch in a normal frame and then you put them in one of these to display it. You can't tighten these ones up. There's no screw fitting here to tighten it, so they're just at the tension they're at, so it gets loose very easily. But you can see that they come in lots of exciting shapes and sizes. We've got oval ones, we've got octagon square ones, and longer ones, and there's a square one there. So they come in lots of different sizes, so that's quite exciting for your framing up. And they just show you briefly, so that's just like a rubbery plasticky bit that bends, and that's the plastic hoop that goes inside, and then you just stretch it around the hoop. So they're not super tight, but they are really great for displaying your embroideries. So I actually got this frame just for this video, just to show you here, because I've seen these around a lot, never actually used one until now. So this is just a spring frame. So this is an outer plastic part here. This is just a big spring. If you squeeze that together, that opens up, comes out. And it's pretty easy to put in and out actually. So you just clamp it together, put it inside and release it like so. Now you can't really tighten these ones. You can just stretch the spring out a little bit if that should get a bit loose. And the thing that would bother me about this one is this big gap here. There's nothing holding the fabric in this bit here. But I did discover while I was playing with this that actually you can frame up this hoop quite easily with just one hand. So if you do have any mobility issues, this might be really good. I'll show you that later and show you how to do that later. So do hang around for that one. So that is a spring hoop. So sticking with the plastic theme, we've got another one here for you, and this is a square one. Now, if you're a machine embroiderer, you might recognise this sort of format. Often they have an extra fitting on them, so you can fit them to your machine and it will do automatic sewing or something. I'm not quite sure how they work, but this is sort of a hand version that you can either use for machine or hand embroidery as well. It's obviously square, so if you wanted to do something that wasn't circular, that didn't fit in a round shape and was kind of that format, something like this would be really good. It's not going to mark the fabric where the hoop sits. And again, if I just take this apart, that's just got a screw thread there. comes apart. It's again got that profile like that previous plastic one we looked at, so it's got that little lip on the inside, little groove in there, and that just fits inside there and just grips the fabric a little bit better. I've tried framing this one up, it does frame up nice and tightly. You've also got some little markers for your halfway points. If you were cross stitching, you could make sure your pattern was lined up with those and you know where the centre is and you can follow your chart. So that's another option for you. So let's look at some frames now as opposed to hoops, so something that makes a square format for you to do your embroidery on. So I'm going to show you these stretcher bar frames. These are probably by far my favourite. I use these all the time. You'll see these in a lot of my videos. And if you're a needle pointer, you'll be very familiar with these as well. And they're just 4 pieces of wood. You can see these ones have been used quite a lot, and they just slot together like so. So you can get whatever size you want. They come in packs of 2s, so you need 2 packs to make 1 frame. You can just slot them together like so, make whatever size frame you make you want, literally to the inch, which I think is really, really great. You can have whatever size you want. These are really inexpensive as well, and you can see how many times I've used them and they'll just keep going. And that makes a really sturdy frame, and then you just pin some pins here, and then you just pin your fabric to your frame. So your working area is inside, and this bit that goes on the frame will be wrapped around to the outside, so it doesn't matter that the pins mark the fabric. That bit should be out of shot. So super versatile, come in loads and loads of sizes. You can make whatever size you want, and really easy to use, and they keep your fabric super tight as well. I just wanted to show you something that was framed up in one of those so you can see what it looks like. So this is my little goldwork sampler that I've made some videos on here, and I've just got this framed up on here ready to do another video if I want to. So it's been on the frame quite a long time, and you can see the pins there, and this has been on a while, and you can see that that's still fairly taut, and that's what it looks like on the back as well. So lots of easy access to get to your stitching, and nice and tight for your fabric. I would say anything bigger than 10 to 11 inches, then consider a different kind of frame that I'm going to go through shortly. So this is another one that I got that I wanted to show you for the video that I've not really used at all, and this is a snap frame. Now this is an unbranded one. You might have heard of the brand Q Snap as well, do very similar sorts of frames to this. So this is a plastic sort of tubular one, and it comes apart like the bar frames that we've just looked at. So I'll just take it apart to show you. So it's hollow, and it just has a fitting there that goes into, and the way to put these together is to make the 2 L shapes and then fit them like that, otherwise it's a little bit awkward. So you just push that in there, that one in the bottom, push them together. They're quite sturdy, this isn't moving anywhere at all. And then what this has is these little clips that go on it. They've got a texture inside, that's to help to grip the fabric on them, and then one of those goes on each side. That's why they're called snap frames. They make a loud noise. And then that will grip the fabric. We will have another look at this when we put some fabric in it, but as you can see, this doesn't go right to the corner, so we'll be worried about the corner not being very tight, and that's snapped on pretty hard, so we'll see how easy that is to get off later. But the good thing about these is they're quite sturdy, so if you did have maybe some mobility issues and you find the stretch bar frames or the ring frames a little bit hard to hold because they're small, these ones are a little bit sturdier, and you've got a little bit more to grip, so you might find that useful. So my frames are getting a little bit larger now, so if you do want to consider doing a longer project, something a little bit more in depth, do take the size of your frame up to match the size of your project. So we're going to look at some more sort of bar frame type designs, but they're a little bit more complex. Now this one is tiny because this is the only one I had, but these do come much larger than this, and this is actually a no-sew frame. So I'm just going to show you how that works. If I undo those, you can see that's on a little roller there. That one is the same. And that rolls out like so, and then the idea is that you literally just tape your fabric to that roller bar, then you can turn that round and tighten that up like so. Just tighten the wing nuts on it, which means you can do a really long piece if you want. So if your piece was only that wide but you wanted to do it really long, then you can just roll it around those rollers and you can move it down as you go. So that gives you a little bit more versatility. Now I did think, oh, that sticky tape's not going to hold that, but it does actually. It is quite strong because you're pulling against the tape. You're not ripping it off or pulling it off. It's hidden behind there. It is actually quite strong, so I was quite pleasantly surprised about that. So that's a no-sew roller bar frame. So on the same theme, but a little bit bigger now, is another roller bar frame. This one is a sew one, so it's got, undo those. So it's got a little bit of tape on the top of the bar, and you actually sew your fabric to the tape, and then you can roll it around the bars, as I mentioned with the previous one, and tighten it up with the wing nuts that are on the back there. This one I've used quite a bit. I actually stitched my temperature sampler on this. So that's this here. We do have a video on how I made this if you're interested to see that. Put a link up for that, and you can see how long that is, and that was on the frame for a year because I did a row of stitching every day for a year, so you can see how long that is. I wouldn't have a frame that long very easily, so I was able to wrap that around the roller bars and then move it along as I worked on it. Now there are lots of variations of a theme on this one, so if you're thinking, oh, I've seen one like that and she's not showing it, so there's ones where you twist the sides and that pushes the tension out from the bars, and there's other variations as well with pins that go in it and you stretch them that way. So there are lots of variations on this type of thing, but basically it is a large square rectangular frame that you can tighten up that way and that way as well. We do have a video on how to do that. It's one of our older ones, but the method hasn't changed at all. So if you're interested to know how to frame up one of these and to do it really, really super tight both ways, then do check that one out. So we're going to look at the mothership of embroidery frames now, and that's this monster over here. Or this is a slate frame. Just about get that in shot here. This is what I used on my Royal School of Needlework apprenticeship. I had 3 of these for 2 years on the go, and we did most of our work, not all of our work, most of our work on one of these. So it's the same principle as that one I just showed you. You sew your fabric to the top frame, that's got a piece of tape on it, and the bottom you roll that round. It's got little pins that go in here to keep that tension that way, and then you put the string through your fabric here, goes round, and you pull the string and that pulls it tight that way. It's a super duper all singing all dancing slate frame. This is they don't come cheap, they are an investment, but if you were going to do a lot of embroidery, or you were doing it for a living, or you had a commission, or it's going to be on the frame for a long time, then these are worth considering. This is a 24 inch, so it goes 24 by 24. Get slightly smaller ones. I'm going to put it down because it's heavy. You can get super duper large ones. So the Queen's coronation robe, if you've ever seen that, Google it and have a look at that. That was done on one slate frame, and the slate frame was made specifically for the job, and it was in the studio, and it was like the entire length of the studio, and they worked on the coronation robe just on that frame. So you can have them specially made to be enormous. But most people don't need one of those. Unless you work investments, you might be making an altar frontal or something, you might want to consider one of those. So that is a super duper all singing, all dancing slate frame. Oh, I forgot to mention that you will need something to rest that on. You can't sit and work with that on your lap. So you will either need a set of trestles. IKEA is quite a good place if you want a set of cheap trestles. You can have them specially made, or you can have 2 table ends and you can just prop it on a table and work something out that way. So you sort of need to make yourself a flat bed so you can sit and work on the frame that way. So that's lots of the different types of frames that you'll find. So let me show you very quickly how to use each one and how to get your fabric in it. Let's look at round frames first and how you get fabric in these. So the trick with these is to do as little fiddling as possible. So just loosen that screw there. So that's just kind of loose inside. And then just ever so gently, just finger tight, so it just starts to bite that. Then take the 2 pieces apart, put the smaller one inside one underneath your fabric. I'm using 2 pieces of fabric here. That's what I would normally use, so I want to show you the 2 pieces. If you want to know about backing fabrics, we have a video on that as well. Check that out. Put that in the middle. If I just push the fabric down over the hoop, you can see that that's in the middle of the fabric. Try and get the grain straight. Then you take the outer hoop. If you're right-handed, you might want to consider the screw on the right-hand side, so you can screw that up. If you're left-handed, you can just turn it over. And then all you have to do is just press down the outer one over the inner one, all the way down. Do it on a nice, hard, sturdy surface like that. And that fabric is nice and tight first go. And then if I show you the back, you can see that the backing fabric's quite tight as well. If you do want to just tighten that up, just grab the opposite corners, pull them into the middle. You can do that with the sides. You're pulling against each other and that inner hoop won't pop out. You can see I'm just doing those separately, and then if you want to do the outer one as well, you can do the same, but the minimum amount of messing about is generally best with this. So that's nice and tight, no ruckles on the back, no ruckles on the front, and then you can just tighten that screw up. It's got a little slot there for a screwdriver if you want to get it mega tight. So dead easy, nice and smooth, nice and tight first go. I'm not going to show you the plastic frame because the process is exactly the same with that. You've got your screw thread, so just loosen on that one, put your inside one down first, press over the top, and that should work exactly the same way as the wooden one. Now the square one should be the same, but I'm just going to have a go at it just to check that. So loosen it off, take that apart. I'm going to use this little bit of yellow fabric again. It goes underneath, make sure it's in the middle. That one pushes over the top. That goes on quite nicely, actually, quite impressed with that. That is quite nice and tight, and then you can just tighten that up. If you want to tighten it, you can just pull it round. So quite impressed actually how easily that one goes in and how tightly that one goes. So the same principle as the round one to frame your fabric in that. So let's look at how to get your fabric in a flexi hoop. So these just push apart. Now you can't tighten them or loosen them like you can with the other one, so this one takes a little bit more force to do. I'll try and get it on the camera first go. This is a little bit trickier. So the inside plastic one down on a hard surface. I'm going to frame up this little Time for Tea project. This design is free on the free stuff page on our website if you want to have a go at this. And again, you can see I can just check where it is, just push the fabric down over the frame, try and get it in the right place first go. You can move it with this one, which is a good thing. You want the little hanging bit at the top. By the way, with these ones, you can squash them the other way. So if you wanted to frame that way, then you can squash it the other way. So I'm going to do it that way. So that goes at the top. Place that in position. And then you need to just work your way around the hoop. So just hold that down with that hand, and then I push over with my thumb all the way around. It should just pop over the edge, which it does. That's actually quite nice and tight first go, and then you can just fiddle with that if you want to. You can just pull that down if you want to make that really tight. Again, just check the back. Same way as before, just pull that into the centre, tighten it. Like so. And then if you wanted to finish this off, I would just cut an oval shape. Give yourself as much space as you can around that, run a gathering stitch around it, pull that up around the back, and that will pull all this fabric nice and neatly to the back, and then that's all ready to display. Okay, so these spring frames, let's have a go at this. So we just push that in, take that out, put your fabric over that plastic frame, again just make sure it's in the middle, squeeze them together, place it inside, and that will spring out and tension the fabric. That's quite nice and smooth on that. Do remember though to put your design, if you're drawing your design on, it needs to be underneath on the bottom so that when you turn it over, that's on the working side. And when you work with this, if you hold this in your hand, then these little springs can get in the way. So I suggest you hold those with the hand that you are not going to stitch with. So you can feel where they are, and then you can stitch with your right hand here. Otherwise your thread's going to get all knotted around those. So that's just a little tip for you. The other thing with this that I didn't mention before is the profile of this. It's kind of, it goes in, it's not a square profile. So I'm not sure how well that's going to fit in any of my clamps and how easy that is to clamp. And then there is just that little bit there that I mentioned before that's not actually holding the fabric. It's not very tight there. That might not matter for something this size. The bigger that frame gets, the more that will become a problem. So just something to be aware of with this type of frame. I just want to try that single-handed because I did mention this earlier. I have had a few people ask me about things with mobility issues and how can they make their sewing life a little bit easier. And I think this frame might be quite good for that. So I'm just going to try it one-handed. So let's just take that out. Just smooth it out a little bit. So I'm going to use my right hand. So you just squeeze it together. That comes out like so. Fabric over the top. And you can squeeze, that's not too hard to squeeze that actually. Be careful you don't slip off because it might ping off somewhere. So just make sure you grip it right. But that isn't too difficult to grip, and I can just push that down in there. let go, and that holds it tight. So that might be a really good option if you do have some mobility issues. So the stretcher bar frames, I do actually have an entire video on stretcher bar frames, how to frame them up, what they're good to use for, all the lots of interesting information about those. So I'm not going to show you that here. So do go and check that video out to see all about stretcher bar frames. Okay, so let's have a look at the snap frame. Now I've left that one on that I put on earlier because I just want to show you that this is quite difficult to get off these. Now they're nice and firm fitting because that holds your fabric tight, but then when you want to get them off, if there is a knack to this that I haven't got, then somebody let me know, because I do find this quite difficult. So I just want to show you this. So, they do come off. That does hurt your thumbs a little bit, so again, maybe something to consider if you have arthritis or anything like that, that might make that a little bit harder. So let's have a go at framing up a piece of fabric. I'm going to talk about what size fabric you should use in a minute and my hints and tips, so we'll come on to that. So again, make sure that's in the middle. Now I do know the trick with this is to do this from the top, and then we're going to twist it around to tighten it. This is going to make quite a loud snap sound, I think, so try and get your fabric nice and straight for this. It's not very easy to move it once it's in. So do opposite sides first. You can see how this fabric is moving now. This is the bit that I'm not so sure about. So I'm just going to pull that over there. Now to tighten it, you're going to twist these around. So then twist to the outside. That is actually really tight. I will give it that. That is super tight on there. But again, my issue is these corners. So this is super drum tight in the middle, brilliant, but there's nothing in the corner here at all. So that would probably bother me a little bit. I am using quite a thin fabric for this. I'm using what I would do freestyle embroidery on. Maybe if you're a cross stitcher and you're using a thicker Ada fabric, you might find these really good for that. Something a little bit stiffer is going to hold its shape a bit more. And getting these off is a little bit tricky as well, but it is super tight in the middle, at least once it's framed. So, and if you want to get these plastic bits off with the fabric on, it's a little bit easier than it is just by hand. But just do this carefully because you're going to pull against the fabric. So just grab the fabric edge quite close to that clip and just make sure it doesn't ping in your face. And just pull that carefully, and that will just pull that off. Do be careful with the fabric when you do that one. If it's a delicate fabric, you can distort it a little bit, but if you just do it carefully, that comes off much easier. So the last frames are my roller bar frames and my slate frame, not picking it up again. Those are quite in-depth to frame up. We've got a whole video on that, as I mentioned before, so do check that one out if you want to use these ones. Very in-depth about how to get your fabric nice and tight on these really good frames. So I just want to talk about quickly some hints and tips when you're using your frame. So this comes from years' experience of using it. So the first one I want to talk to you about is what size frame do you need to use? So basically, and this is going to sound a bit obvious, it's to fit the project that you're making. So don't have your frame too small because you won't be able to get to the edges of your frame that you're working on. So if your design fills the shape, the size of this hoop, and then you can't get your needle in and out of the edges. So allow yourself a little bit extra so your design fits nicely in the middle of your frame. Try not to move your work around in the hoop. So if your design is big and your hoop is too small and you've got to keep moving your hoop around, you will squash the stitches where the two hoops go together. So that doesn't look great. So try and get a bigger hoop. If you get to about sort of above 8 inches, 8 to 10 inches is okay. Anything bigger than that, do consider a stretcher bar frame or a roller bar frame instead. So make sure you've got the right kind of frame as well. So obviously circular round frames are good for circular projects. If you want to do something square, you might want to consider one of these so you don't get the hoop marks on the edge, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. Or if you've got a bigger project that's going to take a little bit longer, then consider the frames like this. Consider the roller bar frames. You can roll it around and you can tighten it both ways as well. So do consider what type of project you're doing and pick your frame accordingly. Now I've just mentioned about marks on it. If I take this out the hoop, so this has been in here literally a few minutes, I'm just going to take the fabric out of here. And hopefully you can see that that makes a ring mark on it, that will come out if I pull it now. If I leave it in for too long, that's going to be a bit permanent. It's not just a crease in the fabric, it does actually bruise the fabric. I can actually see a slight shine on the fabric there. That's it bruising the material. So when you're not working on your piece, do take it out of the frame and then reframe it every time you want to work on it. Do go for the best quality hoop that you can afford. So if you're buying a ring frame, just pay that few extra pence just to get a really good quality one, and that will last you a lifetime. And when you're not using it, just undo that screw thread, just relax the tension a little bit and put it away and store it in that condition. So just when we're talking about storing and storage of these ones with the extra stem on them, they've got a wing nut on them here. Make sure you loosen that wing nut every time you want to move your frame. So if it's sitting in its holder there and you want to move the frame up and down, don't do it with the wing nut tight, because it squeaks and it's really terrible, and that will strip the thread and that will just be floppy and you won't be able to use it. So do get into a really good habit of undoing this wing nut, moving your frame and then tightening it again afterwards. And the very act of stitching on any of these frames, in fact, and you're pulling and pushing on the fabric, it will loosen the fabric in the frame. Even on the big slate frame, you should really tighten everything up, whichever frame you've got, before you start working on it. And if you are using a ring frame and you find that the fabric is slipping in the ring frame a little bit too much than it should really, then do consider binding that inner hoop and the outer hoop if you need to, and that will help with that. Don't forget, we've got the video on that. Do check that out. That tells you all about how to do that. The last little tip I've got for you is, if you do find that it does hurt to hold these frames in your hand, then do consider some sort of clamping system. Having two hands free to work on your frames will help you a lot more. You have to learn to use two hands, but you will find it much easier. So do consider some sort of clamping system like the versatile table clamp, but there are lots of other variations of that around. So do have a look and see what you can find and see if that helps you. So I hope that you did find that useful, and I've demystified all the different types of embroidery frames a little bit for you. If you're finding it all a bit overwhelming and you want to start embroidering, you don't know where to start, just stick with a ring frame or a stretcher bar frame. Those will see you good to get you going on your new hobby. And if you want to know how to frame your embroideries in both flexi hoops and in a normal embroidery hoop, then do check out this video over here. I tell you all about how to do that and how to finish your embroideries off. And if you've enjoyed this video, do give it a thumbs up. That means more people will get to see it. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next time.